The airport buzzed with a relentless energy as travelers hurried along polished corridors and announcements echoed from every corner. Aisha's heart pounded not only from the rush of adrenaline, but also from the anticipation of reuniting with her dearest friend Mia. After a long, exhausting shift at the cafe, she had dashed to the terminal with the promise of warmth and laughter. Her eyes darted from one face to another, scanning the sea of strangers for a familiar smile. Suddenly, amidst the hustle, her gaze fell on a tall, broad-shouldered man in a charcoal gray suit. For an instant, her tired mind misinterpreted him as Jordan, the protective older brother Mia had mentioned, who might be there to greet her friend. Without a moment's hesitation, Aisha launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around the man in a tight, heartfelt embrace. "Oh my God, I missed you so much!" she exclaimed, her voice muffled by the fabric of his jacket. However, the warmth she expected to feel was replaced by a chill that raced along her spine. Pulling back, she stared into a pair of cold, piercing storm-gray eyes that were anything but welcoming. The man's expression was unreadable, his features chiseled with an intensity that sent Aisha's mind reeling. In a rush of mortification and confusion, she stuttered out a hasty apology. The stranger's voice, deep and smooth, replied, "That was unexpected." His calm demeanor, combined with the unmistakable aura of power about him, left Aisha trembling with embarrassment. In the blink of an eye, she had mistaken a complete stranger for someone dear, and now her cheeks burned with regret. When she finally managed to ask his name, the reply sent shockwaves through her: Michael Grayson. Aisha's thoughts spun wildly. Michael Grayson was not a mere traveler, he was a name whispered in hushed tones in exclusive boardrooms, a titan of industry rarely seen by the public. In that brief, awkward moment of mistaken identity, her life had been irrevocably entangled with a man whose presence exuded both mystery and authority. The fluorescent lights overhead cast sharp shadows across his handsome features, emphasizing the symmetry of his jawline and the intensity of his gaze. For Aisha, the encounter felt like a cruel twist of fate. She had come to the airport expecting a joyful reunion with Mia, not an accidental collision with a billionaire. As she attempted to step back into the anonymity of the crowd, her heart raced with a cocktail of shame, fear, and a strange, inexplicable curiosity. Michael's expression remained inscrutable as he adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer before he turned and melted back into the ebb and flow of the terminal. In that moment, Aisha's life took an unforeseen turn. The mistaken embrace had left her reeling, not only from the immediate embarrassment but also from the dawning realization that her fate was now inexplicably linked with a man whose world was as distant from hers as the shimmering skyline seen through the terminal's glass windows. As she hurried away, her mind churned with questions. What did this encounter mean? And why did Michael's gaze seem to promise that their meeting was no accident at all? The next morning, Aisha found herself behind the counter of the airport cafe, the residue of yesterday's events still fresh in her mind. With every clink of the coffee cups and hiss of the espresso machine, she tried to ignore the nagging thought of Michael Grayson, the enigmatic stranger whose accidental embrace had set her heart racing. The cafe was a modest haven in a bustling world, a place where weary travelers and locals sought momentary refuge. Aisha had grown accustomed to the anonymity of serving coffee, but the memory of those storm-gray eyes haunted her every moment. Halfway through her shift, as she wiped down tables and arranged pastries in the display, the bell above the door jingled. Aisha's heart skipped a beat when she looked up to see a familiar figure stepping inside. Michael stood there, his presence commanding immediate attention. He surveyed the cafe with a measured calm, his gaze sweeping over the modest surroundings before settling on her. The way he moved exuded a quiet authority, each step purposeful, every glance laden with unspoken meaning. "Good morning, miss," he greeted with a slight nod that sent a tremor through Aisha's resolve. Despite the initial awkwardness of their first encounter, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Was his return mere coincidence, or did he have another purpose for seeking her out? As she prepared his usual order, a black coffee with just a hint of cream, she stole glances at him, noting the meticulous care with which he carried himself. His eyes, though still stormy, held something softer than before, a hint of curiosity, perhaps even empathy. When she finally approached his table with a steaming cup, Aisha could no longer contain her mounting frustration. "Why are you here?" she demanded in a hushed tone that belied her inner turmoil. Michael's response was measured, his voice smooth as silk. "Because I can be," he said, a small enigmatic smile playing at the corners of his mouth. His answer, though brief, was loaded with implication. It was as if he was not merely fulfilling a routine visit, but instead, making a deliberate choice to be present in her life. Aisha's mind raced as she attempted to reconcile the polished, distant man before her with the unexpected vulnerability that his words hinted at. There was a strange magnetism in his presence, a blend of aloofness and gentle curiosity, that drew her in despite her better judgment. The cafe, with its humble decor and the comforting aroma of roasted beans, suddenly seemed too small to contain the complexity of emotions swirling within her. Over the next few days, Michael became a constant, if uninvited, presence in the cafe. Each morning, as the sun's rays filtered through the large glass windows, he would appear in his usual spot, a quiet corner by the window, ordering his coffee with a precision that spoke of habit rather than necessity. And each time, his gaze would find its way to Aisha, lingering just a moment too long, stirring a mixture of dread and anticipation in her heart. Despite her initial annoyance at his persistence, Aisha couldn't help but notice that Michael never imposed himself. His presence was silent yet powerful. He observed, listened, and left behind an aura of mystery that was impossible to ignore. In those stolen glances, she began to see hints of a man burdened by responsibilities and secrets, a man who perhaps, beneath his polished exterior, longed for a connection that transcended wealth and power. By the close of her shift one afternoon, as the cafe emptied and the quiet of dusk settled in, Aisha found herself standing alone near the counter. The memory of Michael's soft, measured words echoed in her mind. Though she had tried to dismiss him as just another rich stranger, she couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was a harbinger of something significant, a disruption to the ordinary rhythm of her life. And so, as she locked up the cafe and stepped out into the cool evening air, Aisha couldn't help but wonder what fate had in store for her now that Michael Grayson had re-entered her world. In the days that followed, the subtle persistence of Michael Grayson's presence at the cafe turned into an undeniable fixation. Aisha felt the weight of his silent scrutiny with every shift. It wasn't that he forced conversation or demanded attention, rather it was the constant, almost imperceptible way he observed her, as if he were piecing together a puzzle that only he could see. The once safe space of the cafe had transformed into a stage for unspoken encounters, each interaction charged with an intensity that left her both agitated and inexplicably drawn to him. At first, Aisha had tried to ignore the glances that lingered a fraction too long or the occasional slight nod from across the room. Yet, as the hours passed, his attention grew bolder. One particularly busy afternoon, as she juggled orders and managed a throng of impatient travelers, she caught sight of Michael seated at his regular spot. His eyes, dark and probing, followed her every movement as if tracking a secret rhythm. His silent presence was a constant reminder that her misstep, the accidental embrace, had not been forgotten. It was as if he was saying, without words, that fate had intertwined their lives in a way that could not be easily unraveled. Unable to contain her mounting irritation any longer, Aisha decided to confront him during a quieter moment. As the cafe began to empty and the clamor of conversation faded into a soft hum, she approached his table with a determined gait. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked sharply, unable to hide the frustration in her tone. Michael's eyes flickered with a mixture of amusement and something harder to decipher, perhaps regret or a deep-seated desire to be understood. Leaning back in his chair, he replied in a low, measured voice, "I simply find your resilience fascinating." His words, meant to be enigmatic, only deepened the mystery of his intentions. For Aisha, his response felt like both a compliment and an insult. She had worked hard to carve out a modest life for herself, fighting against the odds with grit and determination. To have her perseverance reduced to a mere curiosity in the eyes of a man whose world seemed so far removed from hers was infuriating. Yet, beneath the anger, there lingered a spark of recognition, a whisper that perhaps there was more to Michael than the aloof billionaire persona he presented to the world. That evening, as the last of the customers departed and the cafe fell into a contemplative silence, Aisha found herself alone with her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that Michael's constant observation was not merely a random act of curiosity but a deliberate effort to reach out to her, a silent invitation to uncover a deeper truth hidden beneath layers of wealth, power, and guarded emotions. In the dim light of the closing time, she wondered if perhaps his presence was less an intrusion and more an opportunity, one that both terrified and tempted her. With a heavy heart and a mind swirling with conflicting emotions, Aisha locked the cafe and stepped into the cool night. The city lights blurred into streaks as she walked, each step carrying her further away from the safe confines of routine and deeper into an unknown territory where every lingering glance and whispered thought hinted at a connection that defied logic. Michael Grayson had become more than a passing distraction. He was a persistent reminder that her life was about to change in ways she could neither predict nor control. Aisha's life had always been a delicate balancing act, juggling shifts at the cafe, struggling to make ends meet, and carrying the weight of personal loss. The past few months had been especially hard since her father's health had begun to deteriorate. Medical bills piled up like an insurmountable barrier, and every extra shift at the cafe was a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between hope and despair. Yet, just when she thought life couldn't get any more complicated, Michael Grayson reappeared with an unexpected proposal that challenged every fiber of her independence. It happened on a chilly morning when Aisha arrived at work with the familiar heaviness of worry in her heart. The cafe was quiet, the usual hum of conversation replaced by the soft rustling of newspapers and the occasional clink of a coffee cup. As she made her way behind the counter, Michael was already there, seated at his customary table by the window. His intense gaze met hers as if he knew every secret thought racing through her mind. After serving him his coffee with a forced smile, she couldn't help but notice the subtle concern that flickered briefly across his face, a concern that seemed out of place for a man of his stature. Later that day, as the closing time drew near and the bustle of the airport faded into a calm twilight, Michael approached her in a quiet corner of the cafe. "Aisha," he began softly, his tone far removed from the usual detached politeness he displayed before, "I know things have been difficult for you lately." His words, measured and sincere, caught her off guard. She bristled at first, her pride warring with the raw vulnerability she tried so desperately to hide. But as his gaze softened, she realized that this was not the arrogant business magnate she had come to resent. There was something more human in him. He continued, "I can see the toll it's taking on you. Perhaps there's a way I can help." Aisha's eyes widened in disbelief. "Help? From Michael Grayson?" The very thought churned within her, a mixture of skepticism, indignation, and a reluctant hope. "Help how?" she managed to ask, her voice wavering between defiance and curiosity. Michael paused, then proposed an arrangement that left her stunned. "For 1 week, I'd like you to come to my residence and cook for me. In return, I'll cover the expenses that are weighing you down. Think of it as a temporary arrangement." The offer hung in the air, both audacious and impossible. Aisha's first instinct was to refuse. She had always prided herself on her independence. Accepting money from a man like Michael felt like compromising everything she'd fought so hard to build. Yet, as she thought of her father's mounting medical bills and the sleepless nights filled with anxiety, a grim reality set in. There was no other option. With a trembling sigh and a heavy heart, she whispered, 1 week. That's it." Michael's storm-gray eyes softened with a trace of satisfaction, and without further ado, they sealed the deal with an unspoken understanding that this was more than a mere transaction. It was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. Over the following days, as Aisha prepared for this unexpected new chapter, she wrestled with her conflicting emotions. The arrangement felt both humiliating and strangely promising, a lifeline thrown to her in the midst of despair. Michael's offer wasn't simply about financial relief. It was a subtle invitation to step into a world that had always been closed off to her. A world where every detail was meticulously planned, where luxury and elegance reigned, and where she might, against all odds, discover a strength she never knew she possessed. And so, with her heart pounding in her chest and hope flickering like a fragile flame in the darkness, Aisha accepted the deal that would soon carry her into a realm of opulence, vulnerability, and an unexpected connection with Michael Grayson. The morning of her first day in Michael's world arrived with a crisp clarity that belied the turmoil in Aisha's heart. Leaving behind the familiar rhythms of the airport cafe, she took a hesitant step into a realm of opulence she had only ever glimpsed in dreams. Michael's penthouse towered before her, a sleek, modern monument of glass and steel nestled amidst a cityscape of glittering skyscrapers. As the doorman greeted her with a courteous nod, Aisha's senses were overwhelmed by the pristine surfaces and immaculate corridors that exuded an air of effortless sophistication. Inside, the penthouse was a revelation. The spacious living area was bathed in soft, natural light that filtered through expansive windows, offering a panoramic view of the bustling metropolis below. Every detail, from the tasteful art adorning the walls to the meticulously arranged furniture, spoke of refined taste and meticulous care. Yet it was the kitchen, a haven of stainless steel appliances, gleaming countertops, and an array of ingredients that seemed as exotic as they were abundant, that captured Aisha's full attention. This was a far cry from the cramped, well-worn kitchenette of the cafe where she had spent countless hours perfecting her recipes. Michael greeted her at the door with his usual calm, his eyes reflecting a quiet anticipation as he led her on a tour. "Everything here has been arranged for your convenience," he explained, his tone neutral yet imbued with an unspoken promise of support. Aisha's heart raced with a cocktail of emotions. On one hand, the sheer luxury of the space was intimidating, a constant reminder of the vast gulf between their worlds. On the other, there was a strange comfort in the precision and order of it all. Every utensil, every spice jar, was placed with an artist's care, and she found herself marveling at the thought that someone had built this world specifically to help her. As she set to work preparing breakfast that morning, Aisha couldn't help but feel the weight of eyes upon her. Michael, ever the silent observer, hovered in the background, seated at a sleek table by the window, studying her every move with a mix of curiosity and appreciation.
Hayes presence, ångse an unwelcome intrusion, now carit a peculiar varmt.
His occasional comments, delivered in a tone that was both gentle and incisive, offered subtle encouragement. "I've never seen someone work with such passion," he remarked casually, his words causing Aisha to pause and wonder if perhaps he saw in her the strength and determination that he so rarely encountered in his world of boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. Yet, as the day unfolded, the differences between their lives became ever more apparent. Michael's penthouse was a testament to modern luxury, a world where everything was arranged with precision and care, where indulgence was not a matter of choice but of habit. Aisha, in contrast, had grown up scrimping and saving, where every meal was a calculated expense and every decision carried the weight of survival.
The contrast was stark and jarring.
As she chopped vegetables and stirred sauces, she couldn't help but feel as if she were playing a role in a drama scripted by fate, a drama where the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Yet, amidst the opulence and the unfamiliar surroundings, there was a quiet beauty in the act of creation. The kitchen became a stage for Aisha's artistry, a space where every ingredient was transformed by her skilled hands into a meal that carried both sustenance and soul. Michael watched with a steady intensity, his gaze softening as he observed the care with which she worked. Despite the gulf that separated their worlds, in that moment, they shared something intimate, a silent understanding born of vulnerability and trust. And as the aroma of freshly cooked food filled the air, Aisha realized that this new world, as intimidating as it was, might also hold the promise of redemption and renewal, a chance to rediscover parts of herself that had long been buried beneath the weight of hardship and regret. Over the course of the week, the days melted into a rhythm that was as unexpected as it was transformative. In the warmth of Michael's penthouse kitchen, Aisha found herself not only preparing exquisite meals but also slowly unraveling the guarded layers of the enigmatic billionaire. Michael's presence, once an imposing specter of power, began to reveal subtleties that Aisha had never anticipated. Every morning, as the sun spilled golden light through the expansive windows, he would settle into his habitual seat by the window with an air of quiet observation. Yet his gaze, once distant and calculating, now carried something softer, a hint of genuine curiosity about the woman who stirred ingredients with such passion and precision. At first, their interactions had been stilted and transactional. Michael's occasional comments about her cooking, delivered in a tone that was both detached and critical, left Aisha bristling with indignation. "You know nothing about my craft," she would retort, defending the pride she took in her work. But as the days progressed, those barbed exchanges gave way to a tentative dialogue, a mutual sharing of small confidences that neither had expected. Michael began to ask questions about her childhood, about the recipes that had been passed down in her family, and about the memories that danced behind her eyes when she spoke of simpler times. In return, Aisha caught glimpses of Michael's own struggles, whispers of regret and responsibility that contrasted sharply with the confident exterior he maintained in the boardrooms. One afternoon, while stirring a particularly aromatic stew, Aisha paused as Michael softly remarked, "You have a fire in you, one that refuses to be quenched by circumstance." The words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within her. It was as though he saw in her the unyielding spirit of someone who had weathered countless storms. Her heart softened, and in that moment, the gulf between them seemed to narrow. Michael's voice dropped to a near whisper as he continued, "I admire that. And I wonder, if life gave us a chance, could we find a way to bridge our worlds?" The question hung in the air, a delicate unspoken invitation that both terrified and thrilled her. Aisha wrestled with conflicting emotions. Every fiber of her being screamed that she should remain guarded, that the line between gratitude and dependency was razor thin. Yet there was a burgeoning sense of hope, a realization that perhaps beneath the veneer of wealth and power, Michael was a man who understood pain and loss. He had never imposed himself, never demanded anything in return for his kindness. Instead, he simply observed, listened, and occasionally offered a word of encouragement that touched her soul. As the week progressed, Their routine became a dance of shared moments, quiet mornings filled with the clatter of utensils and gentle conversation, afternoons punctuated by the aroma of simmering sauces and the soft laughter that emerged when one of them made a rare mistake. Michael even began to lend a hand, rolling up his sleeves to help set the table or occasionally chopping a few ingredients, his actions revealing a side that was both unexpectedly domestic and disarmingly sincere. Yet even as the dynamic between them shifted, an undercurrent of tension remained. Aisha was painfully aware of the difference in their worlds, one built on luxury and privilege, the other on struggle and resilience. Every kind word from Michael was tinged with the reminder that he represented a system that had long left her on the outside. And still, she found herself unable to completely shut him out. Each shared smile and moment of understanding chipped away at the wall she had built around her heart, leaving her vulnerable in ways she had never anticipated. By the end of the week, as the final day of their arrangement approached, Aisha realized that the time they had spent together had altered her perspective. Michael Grayson was no longer just the aloof billionaire with an enigmatic air. He had become a mirror reflecting both her strength and her deep-seated fears. In the gentle hum of the penthouse kitchen, amid the clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of shared memories, something profound was taking root. Their connection, born out of necessity and nurtured through reluctant vulnerability, had grown into a tentative promise of change, a promise that neither could ignore, even as the inevitable moment of parting loomed on the horizon. The day came unexpectedly when Aisha discovered a secret that threatened to shatter the fragile bond forming between her and Michael. One late afternoon, while sorting through a box of old family photographs and documents in her modest apartment, Aisha uncovered a faded newspaper clipping. The headline was grim. It detailed the forced sale and subsequent redevelopment of the building that had once been her family's cherished restaurant. Her fingers trembled as she read about the corporate takeover that had left her family destitute, a loss that had haunted her every day since. And there, in the byline and the fine print, was a name that sent her pulse racing: Carter Corporation, the enterprise that Michael Grayson now helmed. Aisha's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of a past she had long tried to bury. Could it be that the man who had offered her a lifeline in her darkest hour was connected to the very force that had upended her family's life? The revelation cut deep. The cherished memories of laughter, of shared meals, and of a once thriving legacy now clashed with the cold corporate greed that had ripped it all away. Consumed by a mix of anger and betrayal, she resolved that she could no longer hide behind the veneer of forced politeness. Michael's presence in her life, once a welcome distraction from her struggles, now loomed as a painful reminder of a wound that refused to heal. That evening, as twilight bled into the penthouse's modern lines and luxurious surfaces, Aisha summoned every ounce of courage to confront him. In the softly lit dining room, with the clink of fine china and the muted hum of the city below, she sat across from Michael. Her eyes, fierce with determination, locked onto his as she demanded an explanation. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice quivering with emotion. "My family lost everything because of decisions made by the company you now lead. How can you stand here and expect me to believe you care?" Michael's eyes darkened as he regarded her, a mixture of regret, sorrow, and defiance swirling within. His voice, usually so controlled, wavered as he began to speak. "I know what you've discovered, Aisha. I want you to understand, I was never directly involved in the decisions that led to your family's loss. But I do benefit from the legacy of those actions." His admission, though measured, stung like a betrayal. Aisha's heart pounded in her ears as the full weight of his words sank in. The man she had slowly come to trust, the man who had offered kindness when she was drowning in despair, was intrinsically linked to the very injustice that had scarred her past. "You benefit from our suffering," she spat, tears threatening to fall. "You live in a world of privilege built on the ruins of lives like mine." For a long, agonizing moment, silence reigned between them. Michael's eyes, storm-gray and conflicted, searched hers for understanding. "I cannot change what has been done," he murmured softly, "but I do care about you, Aisha. I care enough to try to make things right, even if I can't undo the past." His words, though intended as solace, only deepened the chasm of mistrust that now separated them. In that charged moment, Aisha realized that every kind gesture, every shared smile over a simmering pot of soup, had been layered upon a foundation built on compromise. The truth was an unwelcome guest at their table, a truth that threatened to dismantle the fragile connection they had forged. With her emotions swirling like a storm, Aisha rose abruptly, leaving behind a silence so thick it nearly choked her. She needed time to process the revelation, to decide whether her growing feelings for Michael could ever overcome the bitterness of betrayal. As she walked out of the penthouse and into the cool night air, Aisha's heart felt heavy with sorrow and confusion. The promise of a new beginning now lay tangled with the ghosts of the past, and she wasn't sure if she could ever find a way to reconcile the two. In the days following the confrontation, Aisha retreated into a solitude born of hurt and uncertainty. Every morning, as she stood behind the counter at the cafe, the memory of Michael's revelation clung to her like a stubborn shadow. The taste of betrayal was bitter on her tongue. Each interaction with a customer, every carefully prepared cup of coffee, was now tainted by the knowledge that the man who had brought a glimmer of hope into her life was intrinsically linked to the loss of her family's legacy. The penthouse, once a symbol of an unexpected lifeline, had transformed into a reminder of what she had sacrificed. Michael's once gentle gaze now haunted her dreams, the silent moments they had shared replaying in her mind like an unfinished song. His presence had, for a time, been a balm to her weary soul, but now it left her feeling exposed and vulnerable, stripped bare by a truth too painful to ignore. Michael, for his part, struggled to come to terms with the fallout of his past catching up with him. The corridors of his luxurious penthouse, usually filled with a hum of quiet efficiency, now echoed with the unspoken tension that had seeped into every corner of his existence. He sat alone in his study for hours, reviewing old documents and contemplating the irreversible consequences of a corporate legacy built on sacrifices he never wished to claim. The revelation had not only shaken Aisha's trust, but had also forced him to confront the cost of his own success. Late one rainy evening, when the city outside glistened with the sheen of fresh tears, Michael decided he could no longer let the chasm between them widen further. He called Aisha, asking to meet at a quiet park away from the relentless noise of their respective worlds. With a heavy heart, she agreed, not knowing whether the meeting would bring closure or further pain. In the muted light of the park's lampposts, they faced each other. Michael's voice was soft, laden with regret. "I never meant for you to suffer because of me," he said earnestly. "I wish I could undo the past, but I can only promise to help mend the future." Aisha listened, tears mingling with the raindrops on her cheeks. His words, though sincere, could not fully bridge the gap left by years of injustice. "I trusted you," she whispered, voice trembling. "And now I don't know what to believe." The park's quiet offered no easy answers, only the stark reality that the fallout of their meeting was far from over. In that fragile moment of truth, Aisha realized that moving forward would require more than forgiveness. It would demand a re-examination of everything she had ever believed about love, trust, and redemption. For weeks, the aftermath of that fateful encounter lingered like a persistent ache. Aisha withdrew into herself, struggling to find solace in the familiar routines of her life, while Michael remained in the background, attempting to make amends without imposing upon her wounded heart. Their once steady connection had splintered into a labyrinth of doubt and regret, leaving both to wonder if the promise of a new beginning was worth the painful price of the past. Just as Aisha began to reconcile with the bitterness of betrayal, fate delivered a crushing blow. One stormy evening, while she was closing the cafe alone, her phone rang with a shrill urgency that shattered the tenuous calm. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, and as she answered, her heart sank. The voice on the other end was calm, yet filled with gravity, a doctor she recognized from a hospital she had visited before. "Aisha, it's Dr. Omar. Your father has collapsed, and we've rushed him to the hospital," he said with measured urgency. In that moment, the world around her dissolved into a swirl of panic and helplessness. The weight of her father's deteriorating health, the looming specter of unaffordable treatment, and the crushing loneliness of a life that had already taken so much from her converged into a single unbearable crisis. Racing against the biting cold and the relentless rain, Aisha grabbed her coat and fled the cafe, her thoughts a jumbled mess of fear, regret, and despair. Each step toward the hospital was a battle against time, a desperate dash fueled by love and a determination to salvage whatever remained of her fractured world. At the hospital, the sterile white corridors and the sharp scent of antiseptic offered little comfort. Aisha's heart pounded in her ears as she navigated the labyrinthine hallways, her mind consumed by the terrifying possibility of losing the one person who had always been her anchor. When she finally reached her father's room, she was met by the sight of him lying pale and motionless on a hospital bed, connected to a maze of monitors and tubes. The doctor's solemn expression confirmed her worst fears. Her father's condition was critical, and without immediate expensive surgery, the prognosis was grim. In the midst of the chaos, as Aisha sat by her father's side clutching his frail hand, her thoughts turned to the only lifeline that had appeared during her darkest moments, Michael Grayson. The bitter memories of betrayal battled with the lingering spark of hope that had blossomed during their shared moments in the penthouse. And now, in the face of her father's life hanging by a thread, she had no choice but to swallow her pride. With trembling fingers, she dialed Michael's number, a number she had memorized during their previous encounters but had never dared to use. The phone rang, each tone echoing in her mind as she waited in fearful silence. When Michael finally answered, his voice was calm and unexpectedly gentle. "Aisha," he said softly, a note of concern threading through his words, "what's wrong?" The urgency in her voice as she explained the situation broke through his usual composed exterior. In that fraught moment, Michael's tone shifted. "I'll be there," he assured, and though his words did little to erase the pain of the past, they offered a flicker of hope, a promise of support when she needed it most. As she lingered in the sterile glow of the hospital room, Aisha felt a tumult of emotions. She was terrified, angry, and desperate, all at once. Yet amid the overwhelming fear, Michael's unexpected response stirred something within her. Perhaps, she thought, this was the moment when pride must give way to necessity. In the cold, harsh reality of the hospital, every second counted, and the only thing that mattered was saving the life of the man who had been her anchor since childhood. With her father's fate hanging in the balance, Aisha clutched Michael's words like a lifeline, uncertain of what the future held but resolute in her determination to see her father through this storm. In the days that followed her father's collapse, Aisha found herself navigating a treacherous landscape of despair and reluctant gratitude. As her father's condition stabilized, though his recovery remained fragile, the mounting medical bills loomed like a dark cloud over her already precarious life. The exorbitant cost of the surgery and the lengthy, uncertain road to recovery was a burden too heavy for her modest income to bear. Amid this turmoil, Michael Grayson reappeared in her life with an offer that was as unexpected as it was impossible to refuse. Late one evening, after visiting her father at the hospital and returning to the meager refuge of her small apartment, Aisha's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Michael had sent her a discreet text, "I want to help. Meet me at my penthouse tomorrow." His words were succinct, yet their implications were profound. Torn between resentment and the desperate need to secure the funds that might save her father's life, Aisha hesitated for only a moment before replying. The next day, with a heavy heart and a mind teetering on the brink of despair, she found herself standing before the sleek, modern entrance of Michael's residence once again. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with an intensity that made every heartbeat echo like a drum in the silent corridors. Michael greeted her in his usual calm manner, but his eyes, storm-gray and earnest, betrayed a sincerity that softened even the rough edges of her pain. "Aisha, I've been thinking," he began, his voice low and measured. "I know my company has played a part in your family's hardships. I can't undo the past, but I can help you now." His offer was as direct as it was laden with unspoken complexity. He would cover all the medical expenses for her father's surgery and subsequent care. In return, he asked for nothing more than her trust, for the sake of necessity and perhaps silently, for a chance to prove that he could be different. Aisha's initial reaction was one of fierce indignation. The idea of accepting help from the man whose corporate legacy had wrought so much devastation in her life felt like a betrayal of her own values. Yet, as she looked into his unwavering eyes, she saw not the cold detachment of a ruthless businessman but a hint of vulnerability and genuine concern. "Why should I believe you?" she demanded, her voice cracking with emotion. "What do you really want from me?" Michael's reply was simple and disarming, nothing more than the chance to do what's right. "I'm offering you a way out, a way to save your father. I ask nothing in return, except that you let me help." His words, though measured, carried the weight of an unspoken promise, a promise that if she allowed him to intervene, her father would receive the care he desperately needed. Caught in the maelstrom of her circumstances, Aisha felt the walls of her resolve begin to crumble. The very idea of a man like Michael Grayson extending a lifeline was both repulsive and impossibly alluring. With her father's life on the line, the choice was excruciatingly simple yet soul-crushing. In that moment of desperation, pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "I accept," she whispered, each word laced with the bitterness of reluctant surrender. Michael's expression softened, a small smile flickering at the corners of his lips, one that suggested both relief and a renewed determination. That night, as Aisha lay awake in her sparse apartment, the enormity of her decision pressed down on her like an avalanche. The deal with Michael was not just a transaction, it was a pact with a man whose presence had become both a source of solace and a reminder of painful truths. And while her heart ached with the knowledge of what accepting his help might ultimately cost her, she also knew that in this desperate hour, it was a risk she had no choice but to take. In the quiet aftermath of her decision, Aisha found herself adrift between gratitude and suspicion. Her father's condition improved steadily under the care that Michael's resources had secured, and the once overwhelming dread began to ease, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. Yet the emotional landscape of her life remained turbulent. Every time Michael visited, whether to check on her father's progress or to share a quiet meal at his penthouse, a storm of conflicting feelings roiled within her. The bitterness of betrayal, the weight of her family's past, and the unexpected tenderness that Michael had shown all coalesced into a reality that was as complex as it was painful. One afternoon, as soft light filtered through the expansive windows of Michael's dining room, the tension between them reached its peak. Aisha, her eyes red from tears and exhaustion, could no longer contain the cascade of emotions that had been building over weeks. "I still don't understand," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "How can I trust you after everything that's happened? I've seen the damage your world has done to my family." Michael's gaze, usually so controlled and measured, softened with a vulnerability that took her by surprise. "I can't change the past, Aisha," he replied, his tone heavy with regret. "But I can try to be better in the future. I never wanted you to suffer, and I am willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust, even if that means facing the consequences of a past I cannot undo." The raw honesty in his words struck a chord within her. As they sat together in the stillness of that sunlit room, the facade of the invincible billionaire seemed to crumble away, revealing a man burdened by regrets and desperate to atone. Michael began to share snippets of his past, a childhood marked by the unrelenting pressure of expectation, decisions made in boardrooms that had cost more than mere money, and a deep-seated loneliness that had driven him to seek solace in power. His revelations did not erase the pain of her family's loss, but they painted a picture of a man struggling under the weight of his own demons. Aisha listened, torn between the desire to forgive and the instinct to protect herself from further hurt. In that charged silence, every word, every pause, became a step toward a truth she had long resisted. "I've spent my life fighting for every scrap of dignity," she admitted softly. "And it hurts to think that someone like you could be responsible for that struggle." Michael's eyes, dark and earnest, met hers with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I know," he said simply. "And that's why I want to help, not just financially, but by showing you that I can be more than the sum of my mistakes. I want to be someone you can lean on, if you'll let me." The conversation lingered in the space between them long after the words had been spoken. Aisha realized that facing the truth meant accepting the complexities of human nature, that the capacity for both cruelty and kindness could reside in the same heart. She was forced to acknowledge that the man before her, with all his flaws and transgressions, was now an integral part of her life. And as painful as it was to admit, the unexpected compassion he had shown during her darkest moments was a testament to the possibility of change. In that quiet confrontation, Aisha resolved to take a tentative step forward. While the scars of the past would remain, she understood that forgiveness was not a sign of weakness but a necessary path toward healing. As the afternoon light waned into dusk, she reached out and placed her hand over Michael's. It was a gesture of fragile trust, a promise that, despite everything, they would try to navigate the uncertain future together, one honest conversation at a time. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere between Aisha and Michael transformed from one of cautious collaboration to an unspoken understanding that transcended their troubled pasts. The penthouse, once a sterile arena for business-like transactions, gradually became a sanctuary where vulnerability and authenticity took center stage. It was during one of these quiet evenings, when the city lights shimmered softly against the dark sky and the hum of distant traffic provided a gentle backdrop, that Aisha finally confronted the decision that had been weighing on her heart. She stood in the sleek living room of Michael's penthouse, the room bathed in the mellow glow of a single lamp. Michael sat quietly on a modern sofa, his gaze fixed on the window as if he were searching for answers in the night. Aisha's voice was steady, yet laced with a tremor of long-held pain. "I've spent so much of my life fighting against what I've lost," she began, her eyes locked onto his, "and I've held on to anger because it was the only thing I knew." Michael turned slowly, his storm-gray eyes softening as he listened. "And now," he prompted gently, "what do you want now?" For a long, agonizing moment, Aisha struggled to articulate the swirling emotions that had defined her recent days: regret, hope, resentment, and a longing for something she could barely name. "I think," she finally whispered, "I think I need to let go, not just of the past, but of the bitterness that's been keeping me from moving forward." The words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain, yet laden with the promise of renewal. Michael's gaze remained unflinching as he inched closer. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting, he said softly. It means accepting what was, and embracing what could be. In that moment, Aisha realized that the battle was not between them, but within herself. All the years of pain and struggle had built walls around her heart, walls that now, slowly and almost imperceptibly, were beginning to crumble. Michael reached out, not in a gesture of dominance, but in an offer of partnership, a silent promise to walk beside her as she navigated the uncertain terrain of forgiveness and new beginnings. "I never wanted to hurt you," he murmured. "I know my world has caused you so much pain, and I'm sorry. But I'm here now. I want to build something real, if you're willing to try." Aisha hesitated, her mind racing with memories of loss and betrayal, yet her heart fluttered with the possibility of healing. "I don't know if I can ever fully forget," she admitted, "but maybe I can learn to live with it, and maybe learn to trust you." The tension in the room eased as Michael offered a small, genuine smile, a smile that was not laced with calculation but with genuine warmth. "Then let's take this one step at a time," he suggested. "Let's create our own story, free from the ghosts of the past." In that quiet, pivotal moment, Aisha felt a profound shift, a recognition that letting go was not about erasing the pain, but about forging a future that honored the lessons of the past while embracing the possibility of love and renewal. As she stepped forward and took Michael's hand, a sense of liberation washed over her. It was as if, finally, she was reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost in the shadows of resentment and regret. The night stretched out before them, vast and full of promise. In the soft glow of that intimate space, two souls, scarred by history yet hopeful for tomorrow, began to write a new chapter, one where forgiveness and trust would gradually replace old wounds. And as they stood together, ready to face whatever challenges might come, Aisha realized that sometimes, the greatest act of courage is not fighting against the past, but embracing the future with an open heart. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, we'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned for more exciting stories, and see you in the next video.